Hello there, everybody, and welcome to BLS027 Show and Tell with Alex INKIN. Alex, how are you doing?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm doing great. Hope you're doing
Awesome.
great too.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being here, straight out of Russia. So today we're going to talk about Tiger UI and building UI libraries in general. Now, Alex has been doing a tour. Most recent show you were on was Tech Talks with Santosh.
Yeah.
And you taught a lot about the things. So I think people who want to learn about the history can check out those live shows. Maybe you can tell briefly about yourself, who you are, and what are you working on mostly. Yeah.
So I work at Tinkoff. It's world's largest online-only bank, and I've been doing this library for 3 years or so, and overall maybe 4 years at Tinkoff. We have our own dedicated components library that we use in all our projects on Angular. And last year, very late in December, we released it to open source. We made a open source theme for it, so it looks different than it does in our applications, and pushed it. Almost every component we had, just some that are really proprietary ones that are not needed for general audience, some bank-specific things. And it's all in open source now, and we plan to continue developing it as open source. We use it in our products as well, so we just have like a sub-module in Git where we have a open source part and some proprietary parts, and we work on that. So
Awesome.
yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell.
Okay, more or less, how many components are there? I'm not sure if you know it from the top of your head. How many you have?
It's over 130 maybe. Not really sure. There are a lot of components, and what I love about it is there's a lot of directives and helpful tools as well, helpful services. So it's very modular, and a lot of things can be used outside our library. So if you want to build something of your own, you can use some low-level helpers that we have. It not necessarily has to look like our application. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this is exactly the reason why I invited you. I've trying to build UI libraries for maybe 5 years or more. It's hard to get right. For me, I'm moving from company to company, so I generally start something and either leave the company with it or I abandon the project altogether. You've had basically the luxury of working on the same thing for 4 years and making it work. Let me start off with one question before we go in there. If there would be anything you could change right now, do you have something in mind? Like, hey, I would do this differently if I start out from scratch today?
Yeah, we have such thoughts, and they are mainly targets for a major release. So it's not like something that I would change completely. Our current release is 2-point-something, and we had for a long time pre-1 release, so we had worked on it for about a year and a half before we finalized it as a first major release internally. At first we were doing a lot of breaking changes like every release because it's very early in development. Then we started to do it every month, like every 5th release. We release every year. Oh, sorry, every week. Yeah, after we were happy with what we have, we released a 1.0 version. We were planning to open source it, but we didn't have resources from the design team to make a public design. So we had to work like for a year on 1-point-something, and we had some decisions that we need to change, big changes that were breaking. So we once we finished them and we had the design ready, we released the open source version as 2.0. And right now I have 2 things I'm thinking of for 3.0. I'm not sure if they are happening. One is all our input components. They don't have the input available to the user. It's built inside. It's good for us because we control everything that happens with it. We put directives on it. We style it without global styles or ngdeep. But if you want to put some attributes on it that are not available in our wrappers, so it's hard for people to do. So this is something I would like to at least look into, because it seems like a good addition for people.
Awesome.
And the second one is right now for accessibility, we move focus completely to the options in the dropdown. So when you are in a select and you click button down, arrow down, you move the focus in the drop down. It works. It's a good workaround because it works for screen readers. It has accessibility built in. But what we should have done is area active descendant. It's an attribute that actually determines what element is pseudo focused right now for the parent element. So this is something that I would like to look into as well, because sometimes the thing that the focus moves away from the input makes some some things hard to do. Like we cannot use focus within CSS selector because focus can move away. So this is from one point it's hard, and from the other point it's not that hard, because we actually listen to keystrokes on the actual element in the drop down. So it's a fundamental thing to change. It's something that we need to architecture more. So these two things are what I'm looking into as big changes in 3.0, and like I said, I'm not sure if they are happening. Maybe it's better to leave it as is, but I'm going to look into that.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's share the code any minute now. We're 10 minutes in. Great moment to pop open an editor. So let me move this into view. Or actually, first starting out with the website. It all looks great. I think it looks super well done. I think a lot of us don't have the luxury of having a design team, even though they might be busy at sometimes. So one of the interesting things before we go actually look at the components, you mentioned it has accessibility built in. So I can imagine for your bank, the company you work for, it's super important to be accessible for basically anybody.
Yeah, we try to.
Yeah. So this is super nice. One of the other things, like the first time I saw the website, it was all still in Russian. So it looks like it now has internationalization built in.
Yeah. Actually, these are all contributions from community. We had Russian and English versions, and Spanish, German, Turkish, and Dutch were submitted.
Awesome.
Pull requests. It's not that hard to do. I mean, we have a README instruction, and it's basically a token-based thing. So there's also there's not much text in the components library itself, and the demo portal we translated to English ourselves because there's a lot of text. We also have Russian text, but I think you cannot yet switch to it. We're gonna have to enable that as well. So it's in terms of internationalization, the library, it's just a token with observable, so you could switch it on the fly. And the portal is internationalized with Angular I18N, so there would be different apps deployed on different routes. So that's coming.
Very cool. Yeah, and it's what you say there is pretty understandable. Like a component library itself probably has little text. I mean, I can imagine, for instance, your calendar where you want to have like month, week, these kind of works. Yeah. And okay, awesome. So super interesting. And I think like a lot of people that are working on an Angular app or any framework for that matter will end up at some point build their own UI library. So what I would really like to focus on is some patterns you have. Now, I think you already mentioned one where the input wasn't exposed directly. So you basically hide the actual input away. When I look at the button, I think I see something similar. When I check here, the way the button here is implemented, from at least the selector point of view, this looks like a directive. And then when I look in the code, it actually is a component.
Yes, that's right. It's a component.
But is this the same reason? Because what I generally end up with, I would expect here a TUI button tag and then style it all that way. But this kind of has the same issue where I hide away the button from the actual user.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, we started, like you said, at first we had TUI button and the button was built in, but at the end we figured out we don't really have to do that. The TUI button selector is a component. It can go on a link, so the link looks like a button, or it can go on a native button. So it's just the internals are changed.
Let's take a quick look at how this works, because button, the reason I pick it, it might not be the most interesting, but it's often one that I start with if people want to have like custom UI library. It's like a very common thing. And yesterday when I was preparing for this, I looked to it and I see that this is the selector, so it can be can be added to button with TUI button and to an A, as you mentioned. And there is a TUI button icon, which
icon button was also a separate component before that, but now it's just the same because all that changes is the styles, and we can style it depending on the attribute.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, so then this is the selector part. So I was a bit fooled because I didn't realize you could address components this way. I think Angular Material does a very similar pattern, right? So you take the native, native button.
I think they have the kebab case for that, because it's a component. But at some point we decided that if it's not a selector, then it should be a camel case. I think it's against the Angular style guide, but this is what we have.
Yeah,
and we also, if you have tab component, it can be a TUI tab, but it also could go on the nav, I think.
Let me
so we try to try these things. So if it can go on a native selector, we try to add it. I think label is also can go on a native label like that.
I should be able to find it like this. Yeah. So
no, not tab, but tabs. Tab is like a single element there. It can be a link or a button. And yeah, that's right. So you see, you could have a component TUI tabs, and if it's reasonable to have it on the nav, then you can add it like that, because it's semantics.
Very cool. Okay, interesting. So this kind of changes my way to think about it, which is always good. This is the main reason I invite people. Also because a lot of people are struggling with these kind of things. Okay, so this interesting selector doesn't really say whether it's a component or directive. First thing I learned in this show, and I think for those that are not aware of the differences, the way I see it, a component allows you to have templates, whereas a directive only adds behavior, right?
That's the main difference. A directive component is a directive with a template.
Right, way better way to put it. Now then let's quickly look into the tabs template. Okay, this is what I love. There's little going on here. This is so good. So looking at NG content,
it could almost be a directive, but we have an underline element that shows the little bar under the active tab, so we have to have template.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Basically, it's a good sign that you can use a directive instead of a component. If you only have NG content there, or just an empty string as a template, then you could probably downgrade it to a directive.
Yeah, okay, interesting thing to part. And I hope somebody who's watching is taking notes of all these valuable things Alex says. If not, I'm going to go ahead and write them down afterwards, because it's this kind of things that we're mostly interested in. And then let's move a bit back to the button. So selector is one. This is how we address either a button or an A to work this way. This is great. So I cannot use just a div to be a button, which I think is ideal. And then the button template here, this is a bit more involved. And specifically, I think it's 3 layers. It's the wrapper, and I love to go in the wrapper a little bit later.
Yeah, it's an important part.
Right. There's this loader. So if we take a look at the button in the, let's go up here. That's this animation, right?
Yep.
Yep. So that's the loader. And then another one we have here is the template. And this is what actually gets rendered out in the button itself. And now here we see the NG content. This is nice. And here is another thing that's a project that looks super interesting to me, Polymorphs. And this is something I think you launched together with.
This is something that came out of this library when it was still closed source. It's a concept that we developed there and separated it into a small, tiny library that we released like a year ago or something. Yeah, when we get to it, I will explain what it does.
Yeah, no, I think so. What I took away from Polymorphs when I saw it, it's a common way to allow your inputs to accept either a plain string or a function or a template or a component.
Yeah, that's basically what it does. That's right. So you don't have to worry about what type of content you need to be able to consume.
Yeah. Okay, so this is another interesting point. I think if you have a UI library like this, you're often not going to know what somebody's going to put into some element. And this is one of the areas where I always struggled. Like you maybe if you look at a button, maybe the first thing you start out with is like its label, which you accept then as a text. But now you want to have something more flexible with here, for instance, an avatar. But basically, you're not going to know what somebody wants to put inside the button. And if you want to add more fancy stuff, let's say a little ng template in here, then it makes things way more complicated if you don't have a proper abstraction for it. So I think this is what
yeah, actually, button is a good thing to study that. So later we can go into details on what you can do with polymorphism using button as an example.
Yeah, that's great. So this is kind of abstracting that away, which again is a very common pattern. But yeah, when I see this, I'm a bit surprised. Like, hey, there's everything except for a button. And as you already said, the wrapper is an important part. So can we take a look at what the wrapper is and what it does?
Yeah, wrapper is a component that we use to display interactive state of a lot of our components. So basically, it's a simple CSS-controlled wrapper that has inputs for disabled, read-only, hovered, pressed states. And there's also like invalid for inputs. And the key thing is appearance. It's a string, and some appearances are built in. You see that we bind it to an attribute, so we could change the styles. And there's also mode. In your current demo portal, you have enabled the dark mode. So buttons, inputs, they react to that. It's not just a change in colors, it's a change in some other things, like in dark mode there's a border around input, and in light mode there's just shadow. So it's not it cannot be done by just switching the CSS variables.
Right.
And as you see, there are some getters that compute the state. If you could look at, yes, the interactive state getter is the interesting one. So it adds an data attribute state, and you see it's a kind of self-exclusive. So disabled cannot be read-only because disabled is the higher priority state. Then it can be read-only, then it can be pressed or hovered, and you see that pressed is not a valid state for mobile, because we check for if we're on mobile. Otherwise, it would just stuck, because you put a finger on the button, then you remove the finger, and it's still hovered, and it would look stuck, and it's not a good thing to do. And if it's neither of those things, then it returns null. It means that it removes this attribute. And then in global styles, we could create appearances for these things depending on those attributes. If you're looking at source code, right? So you could try navigating to core and styles and see there's a wrapper folder there with all the built-in designs for inputs, buttons, and things like that. It's in theme. It's in theme. Wrapper, and then wrapper, yeah. So here are a few built-in wrappers. The primary is the button with primary color, and the thing is that a selected checkbox looks exactly like a primary button, so it uses the same appearance there. But you could override it with dependency injection if you want to customize your application to look differently. And there's a text field wrapper, which is the one that probably the most complex one. It's for all the inputs that we use, text areas, selects, everything. So you see how it's designed. Basically, you have a overall wrapping component, and then you have an after pseudo element that goes on top, and it is used to display borders that do not push the content in. So you could show that the element is focused with some custom border, things like that. So this is what we have in our theme. It's basically what we override in our proprietary library. We have a different theme for different appearance for all these wrappers. So that's how you can customize Taiga to look like your app. There's a section on that on the demo portal. And this is what we are expanding upon, because we've made customization to the level that we can use it ourselves and override what we need. But some people want to use Taiga in their apps, and they need more options to customize. And we're actively discussing it in Discord and GitHub discussions. So this is something we are working on right now.
Awesome. But if I look at this, this makes me super happy, because I think you managed to get everything style related out in one file. This is awesome. Another thing to note here is CSS variables, which I think is a great way to go ahead. Do you also use this in the production environment, or
Yes,
is this something?
yes. And before that, we also used CSS polyfill for Internet Explorer, but like at very early in this year, we decided to drop Internet Explorer support. So
Nice.
we're not going to test it there going further. Right now, it works. Everything works because we used to support it, but we don't plan to,
Actively.
guarantee the support. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're not going to test it. If somebody finds a bug, then we're just gonna say that it's not supported. But if we are trying to implement something new, we would not, intentionally break it if we don't have to.
Very cool. So, okay. So I think this in general is a nice example of how you took some shared behavior out of this button component, because normally a part of this would be in your button, and probably read-only is not relevant for a button, but the others, hover, disabled, are.
Mm-hmm.
And then you basically take it out of this and you put it in a wrapper component. And now everything does this. And so one of the interesting things I found with wrapping components is you hide actually stuff even further. So if you do if you talk about a button and you do a wrapper component in the way I would design it, where it's inside component template, the button, you're hiding it even further. But I think that's kind of a moot point right now when you use these selectors in a different way.
Yes,
So this is very
the cool thing
interesting.
about it is that it's reused because, like I said, the checkbox, enable checkbox, it looks like a primary button, and disabled checkbox, I mean, not checked, checkbox with false, it looks like a secondary button in our proprietary design, and in open source design, it looks like a white block button or something like that. So we don't have to encode all these interactions like hover, press, and things like that in these places separately, because it looks the same and can be reused.
So what I'm doing right here is the click and the hover. It's probably not too clear to see on YouTube, but this is the same behavior that is triggering the hover on this button.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, awesome. And any other places where you use it?
Checkboxes, buttons, filter, I think, as well. It's almost like a checkbox without the checkbox in it.
Right.
And all the inputs.
All the inputs. Okay, this is
and actually this is a cool thing, because the inputs, they get this look from the DI, so it's a token with a default value for text field. And right now I'm working on tables, and you could use inputs in the table, and it would look differently, because the table component that's above this, it would provide a different look for input. It wouldn't have its own borders, it would be a white background and no shadows, etc., no border radius. So this is all interchangeable with dependency injection, and I love that, because I'm a big fan of DI, and this is one of the reasons I like Angular so much.
Very cool, yeah. And this is something, when I looked into this is by far not what I generally do. Is like, for me, building a UI library is something quick and something to show the user, like, this is probably what you should do. You might even use an external one, but like sometimes people decide to build their own. But when I look at this is really using a lot of advanced Angular stuff and things that maybe a lot of people don't even know about or bother with. So I can definitely recommend everybody to check this out and look how this is built. So cool. So this is the wrapper, and then here this is the providers. This is probably the token that you then provide in some place.
That's actually another pattern that we came up with. I think my friend Roman wrote an article on it. We call it private providers. So basically, your component, it shouldn't care about where the data comes from. It just needs the data that it's using. And then it could be a token that it injects, and then it could be provided at some point where you know how to get that. So here in this example, it's just basically moving it out in a different file, because provider here, as well as the token that we inject. But in my pet project called Jamigo app, the Angular karaoke that I'm working on, we used it a lot. So basically our component, for example, that displays notes that are flying that you need to sing, it only knows that there's an array of notes that I'm going to display. It doesn't know where they come from. And another component that's above it that knows how to get them from the database. It knows where the nodes come from, so it provides them for everybody underneath. So this is a pattern that we use often to clear out the code of the component, because component doesn't need to be extracting data from someplace. It just knows that I'm working with this data, and this is what I get from DI.
Awesome.
So here you see the destroy service, and there's a TUI mode. It's a token that we use for that dark and light mode that I talked about before.
Yeah, so this is basically whatever gets provided to this basic thing. So destroy service, everybody works with subscriptions know they should unsubscribe, and this is your little helper service. I can imagine there's an undestroy here or something similar. Yeah, and you undestroy.
It's a very simple service, yes.
Yeah, okay, very cool. And you can inject this wherever you need it. And this is happening through this one. And then the TUI mode directive, as you said, this is also pretty uneventful. I like it. It's super simple. It's easy enough to understand more or less what's going on here. But here's the subject of the change, and if then mode is set, it will trigger a change, and it will store.
Yeah, that's why we need it, because all our components are on push, and if the mode changes somewhere up in the tree, then our bottom component needs to know about that. So there's a stream that you can subscribe to. That's why we have the token there. This is what it does. It subscribes to that stream, then it uses destroy service to unsubscribe when it's destroyed, and then it marks the view for check with change detector ref.
Right. Very cool. So this I think also another thing to mention where it really shows that you're passionate about Angular and using a lot of their advanced features, having it on push by default. So we more or less should be prepared for a zoneless version of Taiga UI whenever that's reality.
Yeah, we didn't really investigate that, but we started with on push and strict TypeScript from the beginning. We wanted to make this as tight as possible so we don't have any loose ends.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Let's quickly, by the way, I'm totally ignoring my guests in the chat. I'm super excited to talk about this. We have Delis Dominguez, which is my wife. Always nice to see support of her. And then Oscar, good to see you here. I wonder the impact on accessibility on using different UI frameworks on disabled people when using screen readers. So yeah, we briefly touched on accessibility. I personally don't really invest a lot of time in this. This is also like basically circumstance. We discussed that you do take this into account. Are there any other parts inside the app where we can see where we can see this being taken into account? Is there any parts where it's like, here's where we do something with accessibility that we can all take away from?
Yeah, well, mostly we try to use native elements like you saw already, real buttons, not divs, real inputs. And in our drop downs, each item for the select is also a button. So the screen readers know that you can press enter, you can click it. This is all like accessibility built in. And all our components can be accessed with keyboard. Like if you use tab to focus tabs, you would use arrows to switch between them. And yeah, it should also work fine with screen readers. We didn't really have much experience doing the accessibility, so I think this is a safe way to do it, just to use native elements whenever you can. And we try to read some best practices on widgets of accessibility guide W3A. I don't really remember how it's called. Yeah. That's why we have the patterns of arrows moving the tabs and not a tab when you are in tabs. And also there's a thing called focus visible. It's finally shipped to Chrome a few releases back. Basically, when you click a button with the mouse, it doesn't display you that it is focused because you clicked it with the mouse, so you don't need to know where your focus is. But if you focus it with keyboard, it shows a little ring around it. And people often disable it with outline none. So because it looks annoying and you cannot really style that.
Yeah.
Finally, we have a way to show focus with keyboard using CSS with focus visible. But we have our own service here that implements that. It detects whether focus came after the mouse event or not. So if you focus our buttons with keyboard or tabs with keyboard, you will see that it displays where you are right now. I think in dark mode it's not that visible. Probably light mode is better, but you could try focusing tabs and it would show a little. You see blue thing there. Yeah, there are some artifacts I see, like a little dotted.
Now, one of the things to note is that I'm using Firefox.
Right? You are using Firefox, yes. So I think we have to add additional style to remove those dotted border there.
But for me, navigating here, this is what I do with cursors. So with the arrow left, arrow right, and then with space, I select them, which does feel native, I must say. But I'm used to having tab being these things, because when I design these kind of things, it's just a row of links generally, which behave in the way they just take tab order.
Yeah, this pattern is actually called roving focus. The one that you have selected, it has tab index 0, and the rest have tab index -1, so you cannot focus them with keyboard. If you navigate away with tab and go back, you would get the same tab selected, I think. Yeah, that's right.
That's correct.
So this pattern is called roving focus, and this is what we learned from the accessibility guidelines.
Very cool.
Also, the tabs are also native elements. They are buttons in this case, and they could be links, external links, or router links that you could click. So this is also in the selector.
So if I want to have like a piece of routed here, I can just make this a link with router link, and it will render out if I provide a router outlet down below.
You just have to use the router outlet below tabs, or the tabs will disappear. Right.
Very cool. Okay, awesome. Let's quickly move here. Say hi to Roman, which is your buddy, your co-worker on Tinkoff. Roman is one of the other people working on Tiger UI. Good to see you here, Roman, and thanks for all you do for this project. And he said he's literally working right now on the article about the text field settings. So
yeah, it's pretty complicated stuff.
I can only imagine. And it's super nice. Big props to Tinkoff for giving you guys time to work on this. This really helps the community in building better quality software. So it's amazing that a bank invests in things like this, I think.
Yeah, it's not really a bank anymore. It's like an ecosystem. We have like ticket services for travels, for movies, things like that. So it's a big ecosystem, like I said. And
very cool.
Yeah, we have a lot of Angular apps, but mostly for the business users, not some physical people. So we also have a React department that works on separate projects. So it's like two different sides. One is Angular, one is React.
Very cool. And is it on the teams themselves to decide what they support, or is it like we have certain guidelines? Maybe front-end logic is all done in React, and
I think it just comes in naturally because people tend to move from different projects horizontally and bring the technology with them. So mostly the separation is like that. So the business unit that works with small businesses and medium enterprises, they use Angular with their applications, and the ones that work with physical persons, I'm not sure how it's called in English, like just regular people.
In person.
Individuals, right? They are using React. So all those, like I said, the tickets purchasing services, they use React.
Yeah, very cool. And is there, in terms of UI, I can imagine if this is the company style, these things look the same, I guess, from a usability
they also
point
have
of view.
their own library that looks the same in React. So this is how the thing is done. So we have a design team that provides the specifications, how it must look like and behave. And the two teams implement it. One is us in Angular, and the other team does the same in React. So it's like two separate libraries. And you might imagine they're very different because we have DI, that React doesn't have DI. So it's very different.
Yeah, I think I work on both as well, and I end up doing same patterns, but obviously you want to stay also idiomatic to whatever pattern you're using. So at one point I was interested.
That's word actually, idiomatic.
Yeah, right. And like it's like using observables in React. It might work. You might get a good experience, but the next React developer is going to be super surprised when they see this pattern. And I think in Angular, if you would use a lot of things in the React land, so basically doing everything with higher order components in Angular, which you can do to some extent, it's kind of weird as well. So staying native to whatever you're working is good here. Awesome. So, so this is interesting. Great point here, Oscar, on accessibility. I already have one big takeaway. I'm going to rework the stuff I do using selectors, exposing the front end, exposing the real native component. If there's anything you want to show right here, we can totally do so. If there's something you want to do to wrap up, otherwise maybe we can take a look at how polymorphism is being used. And
yeah, I think it's a good time to switch to polymorphs because this is like the meat of customization that we have. It's really what this whole library is built upon.
Yeah.
I think the other way around, like I said, it's the concept that came out of building this library, but
yeah,
now you can say that the polymorphism is in the root of this.
Yeah, so this is an interesting pattern. I see myself doing this a lot, where you start building on something to fix your solution, and then meanwhile you're building a very interesting technical thing that can be used outside of it. And so when we quickly go into, I should have this this link right here, ng polymorphs. Yeah, if I Google it like this, then it will pop up. Should pop up. I think it's...
There's an npm package with a link to GitHub, I think.
Yeah, so it should be here, and then...
Yes, there is. Second from the button.
There we are. Awesome, and this takes it to the GitHub, so we can take a look. Okay, so the website itself, this is Matrix, if I recall correctly.
That's right. It's Morpheus, but it's Polymorphs. It has 4 options for you, not...
Yeah, not just the red and the blue pill. We also have 2 more pills. So
yes.
So very interesting. 1 kilobyte library, so very cheap buy-in for something that you might be doing yourself. And then what kind of got it for me when I saw this site, so I haven't touched it, I haven't used it, but I was definitely interested. This is here, what we see here is a header which is using the Polymorphs outlet directive, or maybe component, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, it's a component.
It's a component as well. Just hides itself as being a directive, but I just...
Yes, at first it was a separate component, but we figured out that it's a different, another layer that we don't really need. You could use it on header, and then it's like a semantically header. You don't have to wrap it with another element.
Yeah, I think if there's anything, if I can say it already, we're 40 minutes in, the biggest takeaway for me is to start using this pattern. And I never really understood why. I saw the Angular material team do it, and I was like, they must have a good reason for do so, but I never really got it. So this is definitely interesting. And then here we pass in the content. So the content can be either one of number or string, like primitive type.
Yeah, this is something we need to discuss, right?
Right.
The content.
Yeah, we can take functions that take context, templates that get instantiated with the given context, and then components, then context, whatever we pass in here. So
yeah, let me just explain it a little bit real quick. So the thing is, how we can put some different content in Angular is we could use interpolation, which is like a string or maybe a number turned into a string. And this is like the most basic thing that we can do.
Yeah.
And what is lacking here is we don't have any context. It's just a string. If we want to introduce context, we could also use just interpolation, but it would be a function. It would be something that takes context inside and returns some primitive value out, like a number or a string. And so this is where we introduce functions. A lot of people use string or template here and there. I keep seeing that, but it's really just a tip of the iceberg. The whole thing is that there's no difference really between dynamic components, templates, or functions. It's just a way to show some content based on some context. And this is what Polymorphs is about. It just takes the content and context and shows it. So templates is what people a little bit used to. They use it often, not as often as just interpolation, of course, but when you start working on some component, you want to add customization, like what it shows. And at first you might think that the string is enough. I could use a string input, but then you need to maybe use some HTML, some CSS, like bold text or something like that. Then you start to upgrade it to a template, and then you have to reuse some content across applications, maybe in your monorep or something like that. Then you have to upgrade it another way up to a dynamic component that you could put in a library and reuse. So this is this thing is taking all of this inside and just context, because it's while the concept is the same, it's used differently. In function, you just put the context in. In template, you have to instantiate the template with given context, and in dynamic components, it's even harder because you have to create an injector and put the context as a token in it. So while the concept is the same, the mechanism is different, and you have to take that into account. So this is what we built inside the Polymorphs outlet. It just takes the content in, it checks what type is it, and then applies a built-in Angular feature to show it. So inside, if you look at the source code, you will find just a template outlet, interpolation, and component outlet. That's all there is, and basically that's why it weighs so little, just 1 kilobyte, and why it has probably no errors there. So it delegates all the work, all the heavy lifting to Angular itself. So this is what's cool about it.
This makes me even more curious to dive into the meat of it here.
Yeah, you're looking at the demo, I think. No? Oh, no, it's the library itself, right?
The project. And then here in directives, I can imagine.
Yeah, the directive is actually an interesting thing. You almost never need to use it, but sometimes you do. It's a directive that you put on ng template, and what it does, it injects the change detector ref, and has a method to check the view, because a template, it follows change detection of the place where it was defined, not where it was instantiated. And sometimes you need to kick in the change detection at place. So this is what you do. It helps us in our dropdowns because they are in different views that go parallel. So you have some application part here, then you have a portal that is parallel to it, and the change detection just doesn't know about these two places, and this directive helps us to connect them. So in most cases, you don't need to use it, but if you have some troubles with change detection, you could try it, and it would probably solve them.
This might be the solve. Okay, very nice. This is the context directive. So what we're doing here is injecting any object, basically. We take in anything, and we make sure these are available inside either the function, the template, or the
no,
component.
not really. This is helper directive that is extracting context. It's we should look at the outlet where it's used. Maybe we could better understand it.
Where do I go from?
Since I looked at it. So it's an outlet.
Outlet. Okay, yeah. And then the HTML or the template class.
So you see there's a lot of ng containers, so it doesn't introduce any tags other than itself. And that's why you can put it on any tag you want. Like if you want to display block, you could put it on div. If you want it inline, you could put it on span, or just header, things like that. So at first we check if it's advanced content or if it's primitive, like function, or I mean, function is not a primitive, but it will return a primitive in the end. And then we have a ng template outlet that shows default template as well. So it's an interesting thing. If you could go back to the button, we could take a look at that. So
in the source, right? Or how you use it here?
Yes, here. That's right. So you see inside Polymorphs, we have a template, and it has a let icon. So in case the Polymorphs returned primitive, or if you gave it primitive, like a string, or a function that returns a string, you could have a default template for it. So right now, if you pass a string here, it would be used as an SVG icon for a button. And if you pass a template, it would be shown as a template. That's how you could easily use icons with button. But if you want some advanced stuff, you could use avatar or a dynamic component as well. So this is why it's called polymorphic templates. They actually adapt to what you send to them.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool because here, this icon, it can also be a number, for example, and in some places we show icon for string, and if you pass a number, then it would show a beige like with unread messages number, things like that. It's really a flexible thing to do. And then inside it, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm fascinated about how this works, and I think in order to see this using, we can check how you passed in your avatar here, right?
Yeah, we could check that.
So, okay, so here what you do, okay, this is the NG template, which you have here the icon identifier.
Yeah, it's called icon. It should be called avatar. Just
sure, but this is your little piece of template, and you're passing it in here on line 10. Now, one of the things I always saw myself doing, and this is definitely like I knew I was doing the wrong thing, but I didn't know how. If I want to add avatar support to a button, I generally add an avatar URL property to the button, and like, okay, gonna add an avatar here. Now you're basically messing up your API because like next time somebody wants the avatar on the right hand side, and then you're like, okay, what I'm gonna do after right?
Yeah, that's how it often starts, and this is another concept that we use here. We try to make our components do not care about the data model they're working with. So a lot of them are using generics. We have very little interfaces, and that's how you get your components to work with any model that app is using.
Awesome. Yeah, let's. So this was a quick A-side of how we actually use this. So you pass something in INKIN, and it's either a number or a function that returns a primitive, or a component or a template. And,
it could be anything like that.
It magically works. Awesome.
So right now you see there is no context here, just content, because there was no need for it. But you could actually, if you want, make a context here and, for example, pass if the button is focused or not. If you want your content to react to that, maybe change color or something like that. So it's you just need to pass it here, and then you need to change the interface a little bit of the icon so it accepts the some context. So if you control click on icon, you see that it's polymorphous content.
This one.
Yes, this one. You see, it actually extracted all those types here, but it's we have a join type called polymorphous content, and it has a generic for context. So right now the generic is just empty object, as you can see, template ref with brackets. Yeah, but if you add some context here, you could define this generic in code, and people that use your button would know that it accepts some content and passes some context there, so they could adapt that. Yes,
I can add a icon here. I can define this as a thing, and then I see maybe whatever disabled.
Yes, something like that, and pass it on to the outlet.
Very cool. And now if we go here, then this thing is strongly typed, and it now has my icon CTX. Okay, this is super interesting. And definitely something I'm going to be playing with. So awesome. Is there any other place where we have a bit more advanced use of polymorphous outlet? Do you have any other examples of how this is being used?
The thing is that it's used everywhere, actually. The dialogues that pop up, the model windows, they're also polymorphous outlets by itself. So you could pass templates or even strings, and they will show up and use dynamic components. This is actually one of the biggest places that are dynamic components are used across all libraries, I think, the models, because you reuse them. But in this case, it's also polymorphous. So you can open a dialog with just a string, quickly mock up this, and then replace it with a component that when you finish with them. And error messages are also polymorphous. You know that in Angular, you have in validation, you have errors. There's a key for the error, and there's some value that it says, if you use a native Angular validator for max value, then it would show like maybe max or something like that, and the value of its error would be the current value and maximum allowed value. It would be a record, an object. So our error messages, our component that displays errors, it also uses polymorphous, and the context is what validator returned. So you could, in error message, show that the actual number that you're allowed to enter is like 5, and you entered 10. This is pretty cool. You could also define default messages in DI. The error component injects the token and tries to find the default messages. This is a cool thing where usage of functions comes in, because not a lot of people use functions, use strings or templates, but function is also a good way to display content, because it's on push. It will not be retriggered too often. And here you could define in the dependency injection some functions that show you default error messages for different validators that you have.
Very cool. So a few interesting things here. So this one does support, so this one has a rich context, as you mentioned. So it actually gives you things about the error.
Yeah, it's just a basic error message with styles of red text. And there's a field error that you could put some control on, like form control, form array, form group, something like that. And it would extract the error message from the validation.
That's this one, error.
So
and then another thing.
It doesn't use the controls. I mean, yeah.
Okay, and then the advanced one, how?
Sorry.
Advanced one, can we check that one out as well?
Field error. Just go to field error. It uses the same error component internally, but it passes the error to it from the validation.
Yeah. Okay, and then if I do 42, it's
yeah, that's right.
And here I can.
So this one, it picks error messages from the validator. You could pass the priority here, which message you want to display if you have multiple errors there. And this one, it injects the token, like I said, for validation messages for different validators. This is a cool use of function, because function you can reuse and template you cannot.
Sure. Yeah. So function you can just pass along. It's basically a JavaScript primitive, first class citizen. But here's an interesting thing, because a lot of people, including me, think like using functions in your Angular templates is a bad thing, because they maybe trigger a lot of things. And I think a similar thing, and it may be down to like you need to know how and when you use them. But I think same thing goes for getters. There's a lot of people that say you never use getters in your classes, never do this. I see you're using both.
Yeah, we use it a lot, because we actually benchmark this thing. And, like a primitive getter that just concatenates strings, it executes like 7 million times a second. And it's definitely not going to be a bottleneck of your application. And it might save you a lot of trouble synchronizing states. So my mantra is this. If you have some, like your component has inputs, these are things that define its state. If some thing that you need to use can be computed using those inputs, then it should be a getter. If that getter has to go over arrays or create new arrays, create new objects, this is a heavy operation, and it has to be optimized. It could be optimized with a pure pipe, an Angular solution that is there. And it could also be optimized using our decorator called TuiPure. It's basically the same as pure pipe. It just remembers the last value that the function returned. And if the arguments are the same with a triple equals sign, then it would not be recalculated. It would just return the same value. And this is what we use a lot. So
interesting. So this is memoization, I think, basically. Accepting
you could search the code for TuiPure and see where it's used. It's a pretty common pattern that we have now. P is
TUI pure.
Yeah.
And then to the implementation itself looks like this.
This is what it is. So if it's a getter, you see, we return this new property descriptor. We basically compute this getter when it's called, and then replace it with a property. This is called a lazy calculation pattern, that you don't compute things you don't need right away. You only compute them once you need them. And then if it's not gonna change, you could replace it with a property. And if it's on function, then we remember the original function and replace it with a patched one. It remembers all the arguments that the function was called with. And if the length of arguments is the same and every argument is the same, we just return the previous result. And if not, we compute the new result, save it as a previous one, and return it.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. I think this is another great show where you really tend to use a lot of Angular internals. Very cool.
Yeah, actually, this is something that I cannot imagine working on Angular app without anymore. So the basic pattern is this. So if you have some array of elements and some search query, you could use an geon change or something like that to compute filtered items and store them internally, like an internal state. But instead, you could use a getter for that, like filtered items, but it would create a new array every time. And then you could just have a private function that is called filter items. You put it TuiPure on it, and you call it from the getter with all the arguments it needs. So it's a pure function. And then the result is stored. You don't have to store any manual states that you have to synchronize. It's very declarative, and I love declarative programming. So this is something that we use a lot. And
Very cool.
I don't really like when people say don't use getters, don't use functions in templates.
Yeah.
Basically, you have to just measure that and you have to optimize if you're using them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think in general, these patterns, you probably know how to use them. So one of the common things I hear against getters is like, yeah, but if you do some heavy calculation inside of this, is going to trigger each time. And then I'm like, yeah, okay, but if you're using a powerful tool in the wrong way, you're going to have results that are not desirable. It's like if you to put it in a very other way, if you're using Git and you're pushing everything to main, yeah, sure, you're going to have situations where it doesn't work. If you work in your own project and it's just a serial thing, there's nothing wrong per se by doing this. And I think so knowing how this works is interesting.
Yes, you have to be more careful when you do it, but you get a lot of benefits from it.
Yeah, but don't go make...
I think you have like 1 or 2 NGON changes in the whole library of 100 components, so you don't really need that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another interesting point. Yeah, there's just a couple of references here, but
yeah, a lot of them in the demo portal, I think, like maybe just 2 of them.
Yeah, so there's literally 2, and one of them is in an abstract controller.
Yes, this is what Roman is writing about. It's here, like you see the pattern with change next. It's a lot like the mode directive that we saw.
Right. Yeah.
So this controller is used to push changes through multiple layers of on push, and we use it to control inputs on our text fields, because a lot of them are the same, like on select or on input on combo box. You have similar things, like if you want to show label or not, or if you want to show the size of it. There are 3 sizes of all inputs, like S, M, and L. So these are defined in the bottom layer component that is used in every component of text fields. But if you have it as inputs, you would have to pass it through multiple layers of components just without changing it, just passing through. So we use directives instead, and because they are on push, they have to notify the component below that the changes happened. So I'm not gonna go deeper into that because Roman is writing an article, so you could check it out later on.
I'll definitely share that on my social networks when that comes out. Okay, I think we can talk for hours about this stuff. This is super interesting, and you've done a great job building this out, making a lot of inspiring decisions. Yeah, very cool. And I think one of the things yesterday I saw, but it was late, so I don't really know if I recall it correctly. If there's not an avatar, it must be INKIN then.
To SVG, we have SVG component.
Is it the SVG?
Just tell me what you're looking for. I'll try to.
Well, this is the thing. I don't know what the. I saw you. Yeah, this. There you go. I saw this decorator, TUI required setter, and I was curious if you could enlighten a little bit about what this required does.
Right. Sure. We have 2 decorators, required setter and default prop. They're doing pretty much the same thing. They do not allow you to pass undefined. Before Angular something, you could use undefined items in your template. You could forget to define them in the component, and nothing would tell you about it.
Yeah.
So here we put not an error message, but an assertion failed message. If you passed undefined, that we will not call the setter, so that the previous value would stick. You could also pass some function there, additional assertion inside this decorator that would check for it. We could try looking for real examples here, but I could just give a brief example. Like if you have a quantity input, it cannot be below 0, right? You cannot have negative quantity, and you could put an assertion there. Like if not a number got there or a negative number, you could print an assertion in console, and developer would see that there is some error in his logic somewhere up the line. We try to find those as early as possible, so our utility methods also have those assertions. They are only shown in dev mode, so they will not show in production. And you could pass additional checks to inputs using those decorators. And like I said, we use strict TypeScript, so null, undefined, they are separate types, and if we support them, then they are explicitly mentioned in the type, and if not, then you shouldn't pass that. So that's why we put error messages on undefined. I think Angular Language Service prints an error itself if you put some undefined values as inputs, but this was like Angular 5 or something when we created that. Yeah,
way back when.
Our developers, actually, most of them really like that this library is really strong typed, and enforces them to write clean code. Like if you are not careful, it would just tell you that you're wrong. And if you want to use Taiga UI, you have to get in shape a little bit to write the proper code.
I think that's very good. It can be super helpful for people. And this is actually one of the interesting things, as I also work with React. React has this built in. If you use React with TypeScript, it will tell you automatically if props is required, but it's not there. And this is something that also, when we have people on the Angular Discord coming in from React, and they're kind of amazed, like, hey, this is strongly typed framework. This is TypeScript all the way down from the start. But there's these kind of things that are not there by default.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a little bit different, because if you do not define this prop at all, it would not tell you anything, because you are not calling the setter. But if you forgot to define the actual value that you passed, it would tell you. And we try to enforce required values with selectors. If you go to the tab, the directive TUI tab, you would see it.
So this
it's
looking at the wrong place.
Yeah, it's camel cased, not kebab cased.
Of course, yeah. TUI tab, and it will be this.
Yeah, take a look at the selector here. Not the directive, the component.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this one. So you see, you could have a TUI tab, but not the router link. You could have a TUI tab with router link, but also with router link active. Otherwise, it will not match, because we needed to know if this tab is active from the router. We have to enforce that it's there. So if you use it with router link and you forgot to add router link active, it would not match, and you would immediately see that the style is wrong. The link is blue with underline and things like that. So you get that something is wrong.
Cool. So yeah, this is something that does work. I know this does work in Angular. So if you put a directive on some place, or a directive selector where it's not accepted, it will tell you like, hey, this thing cannot live on a div. Interesting. So this is how this is done. Awesome. Then I said it again. I'm gonna say it again. We can talk for hours about this stuff, and like we might at some point in the future.
There's a lot of things here.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting to look at. I see you're doing a lot of host bindings for CSS classes, and this is also something I'm not using a whole lot. This is for setting these, right? So if I put is Android here true, this will set this class.
Yeah, you see, this is a read-only, because it goes from the dependency injection immediately. It determines from the user agent if they're using iOS or Android. Actually, we have tabs imitate native tabs for Android and for iOS. If you enable that, there's a token for it called mobile aware or something like that. If you pass true there, then it would try to imitate native tabs, because we have some applications that work like a hybrid app that tries to imitate native application. So we have some things like that. It's not not a lot of components do that, but I think maybe buttons have some styles that imitate native buttons. We have ripples, the classic Android ripples as a directive. We have some. You have to enable imitation of the mobile device. I'm not sure if it works on Firefox like that.
Me neither. But if you go into the responsive mode and
yes,
then this
and
will
you
work.
refresh the page, so it would use new user agent. It would show you the ripples. So this is what we try to do. And if you go to tabs, you can see into the tab. Yeah, this is mobile dialog. It imitates Android mobile dialog. And if you try iPhone, then there's iPhone as well. This is actually a cool thing. We have a way to customize dialogues. So the Taiga UI comes with built-in two different dialogues, the general one and the mobile one that imitates alerts. But you could use dependency injection and provide your own dialog implementation. There's a section on it in customization. You can check it out later on.
Awesome, man. And then tabs, you mentioned briefly tabs.
Yeah, tabs. You see, there's an Android tab and iOS tab. I think it don't look that great in night mode, but if you enable the so this should look quite similar to native tabs.
Yeah, definitely see this. And so this is interesting if you want to run your Angular app, but maybe wrap it in like capacitor or PhoneGap, and these are the kind of things you can use there.
That's why we host bind to the class, so we could style it with CSS.
Yeah,
differently.
Very cool. So, okay, few things to take away. Use native elements, expose your native elements, and that way you get like a lot of accessibility for free. And components are you can use components with this syntax that I was not really aware of. So they appear as directive, which gives you that UI, but you're still using the native element. So this is super interesting. Getters and functions are both fine to use if you know how to use them. This is another nice takeaway and something to be aware of. Use Angular, use the power of Angular. So dependency injections all the way. It's not going to go anywhere. So why not use it if you're building your UI libraries? This is also definitely a takeaway.
Very powerful tool if you use it right.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's in general, Angular is super powerful. You need to know how to use it. I've always built my components like the naive way. Just I'm going to render a component here as any other component. And this is definitely taking it to another level. So yeah, awesome. I'm super excited to go look in it and actually use it on one of my projects. I think I got a project in mind where I can play around with it.
Sure. You can catch us on Discord and ask questions if you have.
Yeah, awesome. There's a great Discord, by the way. Good that you mention it. I'm personally invested a little bit inside this Discord. Here it is, and there's a Taiga UI channel, and it's actually pretty active. I think you almost have daily content here, and you and Roman are active here too. So that's very much appreciated. So yeah, everybody go here if you have questions.
Or GitHub. Just use GitHub discussions as well.
GitHub discussions is another place. Now, is there anything else you like me to share or you want to share here? Something you want to plug? Something unrelated to maybe Angular or even UI libraries? Anything at all is welcome.
If it's unrelated, then check out Jamigo app.
Okay, cool. What's the address? Let's take a quick look.
Jamigo.app. JA. And try it in. I think Chrome is better, but it should work in Firefox as well.
Let me open this one up. Yeah, I'm getting back to a bit of an IE sentiment where a lot of things I visit are built for the browser that I'm not using. But
I think it should work. But one cool thing about it is it uses Web MIDI API. If you have a synthesizer connected to your PC, then Chrome is the only browser that supports it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you could pick some song here. Like there's a browse all songs button. There's a list of songs. There's even one My song there. I'm only seeing the back vocal there, but I can post the music. So each of these tracks is available to play using keyboard, like Guitar Hero, or maybe play with a real synthesizer. You picked mine. That's nice. And you could also sing it, and it would detect your pitch and tell you if you're wrong. And you can try to get best score possible. You can even log in to save the score. and there's a little leaderboard, but I think it's filled with preset values. Yeah, like I picked some fun names from 80s movies and generated scores for them automatically. Yeah. So this is like my pet project that I'm trying to work on with my free time.
Very
so
cool.
It's a calibration. Do you have a synthesizer connected?
No, I don't have it connected. I have a MIDI pad up there, but I don't have any keys. Sadly,
I see. Then it's detected that, so it thinks you have a MIDI keyboard. But you can use a regular keyboard. Just press Z, I think. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and that's something you won't hear it because it's. It sounds awesome. Let me quickly go back. I have my. I don't think this was hearable for you guys.
Yeah, we didn't hear anything.
Yeah, but I had it quite loud. Okay, so very cool. I'm gonna play around with this. So yeah,
Jamigo uses a lot of native APIs. I'm trying to write an article about it, but I'm almost always busy with different stuff. Yeah, this is our pet project with Roman. Web APIs for Angular. This is what we work a lot on. These are little tiny wrappers for native APIs to use in Angular idiomatically. So they are observable based, they are declarative. And this one is using Web Audio API to play the synthesizer that you heard. It's like the biggest project here. There's a canvas that you can use with the declarative directives and mutation observers, intersection observer. This is actually what we use to detect that notes should be played. We don't use any math. We don't calculate when the note should be hit. We just tell browser to detect it for us with intersection observer, and it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Like the code there is very simple once you have all those basic libraries done. The actual code to get this game to work is actually, I mean, shamefully small.
Right. Very cool. Yeah, but I think it's also a testament that you made the right decisions abstracting certain things out. And
yeah, so if you actually want to use this in your app, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. If you want to use any of those things in your app, then just go ahead. A lot of people use resize observers or mutation observers, but they do not abstract them into observable services. So this is pretty cool that you could use them, inject them. And cool thing.
If I recall correctly, I think Angular material comes with a resize observer as well, or I'm not sure if it's resize or if it's what is it? The viewport.
Yeah, it's a breakpoint observer. Yeah, it only detects the viewport. So this is a different thing. Yeah.
But these are very similar, but for other events then basically.
You could check the source code. They're very simple. We just create observables based on those native APIs. So mutation observer, it's actually, I think, you could go to the service. This is actually a pattern that we use a lot. You could check it out. So you have a service that injects the element ref, and it creates a mutation observer. You see inside the super call, and now you have an observable that is based on mutation observer, and you could subscribe to it. It would create a new one and observe the element. And then there's a directive here in another folder that injects this service and just makes it an output. You see, there's an output event emitter, and we just emit those records. And you could put this directive on some element and observe the mutations there. This is what we try to do.
Cool.
We put the service to do all the work, and then we have directives that just inject them. And one cool thing here, you see in the constructor, there's an interesting pattern here. If you check it out again, you see there are arguments unknown that we don't use. These are attributes. They are used in factory. You see on top the mutation observer init factory, and these attributes are used there. But we want the Angular language service to know that you could put those attributes there. So we make them in the constructor, and the type ahead would suggest those arguments to you. So you know that they are there, but they're not used in the directive itself. It's a factory that creates the observable.
Very, very cool. And also this looks like, I think you already suggested, it's very minimal, the code here.
Yes, and very, very tiny.
MIT licensed?
Yes, they're all like the most open source you can get.
Yeah, so this is also for people, if you just want to use something like this, you can either use the library, but this is also small enough to just basically drop it in your project and just do something
Yes, we do
very
it in
similar.
Taiga UI. I think we have like intersection observer there and resize observer, maybe even mutation too, because like it's already there. Why not use it?
Yeah. And I definitely, this is something where I work with Go quite a bit, and it's one of the mantras in Go. A little copy paste is sometimes better than a little dependency. And I think I feel with that. If you're going to build your UI library, it doesn't really hurt to have a few of these things built in, maybe customized for you. But by all means, go look at what the experts do. I think this web APIs project is the first thing I knew from you, from your direction, to put it in that way. And then I heard you building Taiga UI as well. It's been super well received. I think there's been quite a bit of attention.
Overwhelming.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah. So go check out as well Jamigo.app, Alex Pet project. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, awesome. It was super nice to be here. Everybody that joined the show, it was great having you here as well. I see that we had here Abel de la Fuente, one of the locals, one of the residents. Super cool to see you. Mr. Jeffrey Boss, also nice to see you here. And Serkan Siapi. And with that, we're going to wrap up this stream. Everybody, thank you so much. This was BLS, and I hope you have an awesome weekend. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.